I've finally made it to the southern hemisphere this season, as we can see that this stamp is from Chile, or Chile, a country that I have not yet explored through philately. This small stamp features what looks to be a person or a work of some kind, with clouds and sun rays in the background that give an Art Deco feel to this illustration. And that would line up as this stamp was issued in 1930, which we can see from the two dates, 1830 to 1930. Of course, celebrating a 100-year anniversary, as the top of the stamp reads Centenario del Salitre, Centenary of Saltpeter. You know that we're going to have to look into that. At the bottom of the stamp we could see correos for mail and the value of 70 or 70 centavos of the Chilean peso. There is a cancellation which actually makes this particular stamp somewhat unattractive, with dark cancellation bars running up the stamp and only a small edge of a circular date postmark, so unfortunately we won't be learning about this stamp's journey. This stamp is of course blue in color and is a commemorative measuring 24 by 29 millimeters. I think that I've pulled a really good stamp out of the box to explore Chile with. After doing some quick research in what saltpeter is and a bit on Chile's history, I realized that the stamp is going to make for a fascinating conversation. So before we begin exploring this stamp and its imagery, get your Chilean stamps out. Let's take a look at Chilean philately. Chile issued its first postage stamps in 1853, almost identical in size to the penny black, and just like the penny black, they were also printed by Perkins Bacon in London. They were red, brown and dark blue in color, with the values of 5 and 10 or 5 and 10 centavos. However, they don't feature the portrait of a monarch or any leader, but rather a bust of Christopher Columbus with the text Colón, the Spanish name for Columbus. Christopher Columbus never made it to Chile. He barely made it to the Americas, so I was kind of surprised to see him as the chosen figure for Chile's first postage stamps. And then I was more surprised to find out that he just stayed on the stamps for 50 years. Christopher Columbus was the face for Chile's postage stamps right from the very first stamps in 1853 through to the early 1900s. Now, Christopher Columbus is a controversial figure today. While he was and is celebrated as the explorer that crossed the Atlantic and introduced the Western world to the Americas, he is also a symbol of colonialism and has been tagged with a reminder of the oppressive years to come for the indigenous people of those lands: genocide, slavery, cultural oppression, and more. But it was his achievement of sailing across the Atlantic and introducing the Western world to the Americas that landed him a spot on Chile's first stamp. Chile is an attractive country to collect, with Columbus heads being popular for a good reason. They are beautiful stamps, well designed, well printed, and not too uncommon. I was able to get a dark blue 10 centavo stamp without too much difficulty. However, getting a brown red 5 centavo was quite a bit more difficult and expensive. I did, however, manage to get one on cover, so let's explore the first cover of this episode. Chile's first postage stamp in all its glory, as if frozen on time in cover, executing its mission almost 170 years ago. This Columbus head, red-brown in color, that cost the sender 5 cents to purchase, was cut from the sheet a little too much to the right. As these were likely cut with scissors, the postal worker left us with a stamp that has a piece of the left side missing, and a shaved portion of the stamp's sibling showing up on the right. The stamp was obliterated with a circular cancellation in black ink, marrying the stamp to the cover, present enough to indicate that the stamp had been used, but delicate and petite to allow us full visibility to the stamp's imagery. The obliterator is coupled with a circular postmark in red ink, giving us a location and date: Santiago, Chile, 25th of April, 1856, 3 years after this first stamp was introduced. This letter was going to Valparaiso, a port city in Chile, some 62 miles or 100 kilometers from Santiago. The cover is, of course, a folded letter, a correspondence between two individuals in 1856, and a fine example of the first Chilean stamp in use. Before we move on from Christopher Columbus and his many heads on Chile's stamps, there's one overprinted set from 1910 that is worth mentioning. That was supposed to only be in use on the islands of Juan Fernandez, islands that are some 400 miles off the coast of Chile. Some of these stamps were surcharged with a value, and others just had the name Islas de Juan Fernandez. Now, apparently overprinting these stamps with Juan Fernandez Islands was a bit of a scheme between speculators and the Postal Service, likely to create items of rarity that would lead to value. So there would be very few of these stamps, and speculators would eagerly snatch them up. Well, once this little plot was discovered, the Chilean government was forced to make the stamps valid and used throughout the country. So they're not rare at all as a result, and you can find them on cover postmarked from the towns and cities throughout Chile. I don't know anything about these islands, or I don't know anything about anything I'm talking about right now. I'm looking it up as I go. But another interesting fact about the Juan Fernandez Islands is that there was a maroon sailor on one of them from 1704 to 1709. This maroon sailor is what is thought to be the inspiration for Daniel Defoe's novel Robinson Crusoe that came out a decade after the sailor was rescued. Even though Defoe's story takes place in the Caribbean, there's a strong belief that this real-life event inspired the book. So much so that the very island that the sailor was marooned on, Masatierra, was renamed Robinson Crusoe Island in 1966. And here's a Chilean stamp that I found featuring Robinson Crusoe that was issued the year before the island was renamed by Chile, 1965. Right, we were talking about Columbus heads and then started talking about maroon sailors, islands, and Robinson Crusoe. We veered a little off course. So going back, the first stamps to not feature Columbus were actually telegraph stamps that were overprinted for postage use starting in the early 1900s, featuring the Chilean coat of arms as well as Pedro de Valdivia, a Spanish conquistador and the first royal governor of Chile. Now, I have no idea if this was intentional or just a coincidence, but he was eventually also the first postage stamp that was printed within Chile, as commemorated by this stamp in 1968. And his name will conveniently show up again later in this episode. Once Chile broke away from the Columbus trend, they began issuing stamps featuring political figures, heroes, and other personalities that made up Chile's history, especially Bernardo O'Higgins, a Chilean independence leader who freed Chile from Spanish rule in the Chilean War of Independence and became a national hero in Chile's history. And I think the key to recognizing him on Chile's stamps is the impressive sideburns. Chile has issued some beautiful stamps of its philatelic history, stamps that portray its geographical beauty, its culture, its heritage. Oh, Easter Island is part of Chile, and some stamps have been issued celebrating that island. Also, Chile's claim to a slice of Antarctica is a reoccurring theme on their stamps. I've made a video on Antarctic stamps in a Season 3 episode, so definitely check that out if that is of interest to you. Now, one of the things that caught my eye about Chilean stamps while I was buying them for this episode is that Chile issued some incredible stamps featuring planes or just airmail stamps that blew me away. Look at this one with the Easter Island head. You can't not love this stamp. Now, I know, I skimmed through Chile's philatelic history pretty quickly, so some of you are going to call things out that I missed or are important. Please do in the comments. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot more to discuss, but I want to get to the stamp that we pulled from the box and see where else it takes us. What is this person doing? What is saltpeter? And why would Chile issue a stamp about it? Chilean or Chile saltpeter in all its names is sodium nitrate, which apparently is different from just your standard saltpeter, which is potassium nitrate, if that makes sense to anyone watching. So in this case, Chile has a saltpeter made from sodium nitrate, a naturally occurring mineral that was an extremely valuable commodity for three important reasons. Firstly, this sodium nitrate could be used in gunpowder, could be used for rockets or bombs. Secondly, it could be used in fertilizer. It's a nitrate supplying nitrogen to the soil without changing its acidity, a vital element for plants to grow. And finally, you couldn't exactly make this stuff. You had to find it and mine it. And Chile had a lot of it that was of interest to the farming and arms industries around the world. So Chile's saltpeter is found, of course, in Chile, but more specifically, northern Chile in the Atacama Desert, a desert plateau and the driest non-polar desert in the world, spanning a large part of Chile and its neighboring countries of Bolivia, Peru, and Argentina. Actually, the map of South America didn't look like this back in the early 1800s when Chile began to mine it. It looked more like this. Chile had a smaller slice of the Atacama Desert. Peru and Bolivia had a larger share than they have today. And actually, Bolivia had access to the Pacific. This is important. There were, of course, a lot of political boundary changes to come. But back in 1830, Chile had only a southern portion of the saltpeter-rich desert. It was in 1830 when Chile began to mine saltpeter extensively and export to world powers. Hence, the stamp issued in 1930 celebrating the centenary of Chile's saltpeter industry. And you can imagine after the 1830s, with wars in the mid-1800s, along with the Second Industrial Revolution and its impact on agriculture, Chilean saltpeter was in demand, and it was nicknamed white gold, contributing to economic growth in Chile. Mining towns were developing in this dry Atacama Desert, and Chile had even been authorized to mine saltpeter within Bolivia's territory of the Atacama Desert, which takes us to 1878. Bolivia imposed a tax on nitrate exports from Chilean mining companies. This tax heightened tensions between Chile and Bolivia, and it escalated to the point of war. Chile went to war against the combined force of Bolivia and Peru. It was known as the War of the Pacific, or the Saltpeter War, that lasted from 1879 to 1884, a war over the driest desert out there, which was played out on land and sea. Chile eventually won this war, even capturing the capital city of Peru, Lima, at one point, and this ultimately forced a peace deal in which Chile was able to gain a lot of land. This result of the war left Peru with, of course, less land, and Bolivia becoming landlocked, losing its access to the Pacific Ocean, while Chile, of course, gained rich deposits of saltpeter. So I actually have a couple Peruvian stamps to check out, because this is really interesting. In 1881, with the occupation of Lima, the Chilean-controlled government overprinted regular stamp issues of Peru with the coat of arms of Chile, a shield with a white star surrounded by a wreath below and topped with 3 feather plumes. I have 2 of these stamps, and we can see that they are the Peruvian 1 and 2 cent stamps, with the arms of Chile overstamped in the middle of each one. And during this time, while Lima was under Chilean control and these stamps were being overprinted, the Peruvian government that was in exile were also overprinting stamps to be used outside of the Chilean-controlled regions. Eventually, those stamps were seized by Chilean troops and overprinted with the Chilean coat of arms. Another dispute played out through philately. I know I say this in almost every episode, but it really is incredible what you can learn from philately. Now, Chile, having just won the war, is in possession of more coastal territory, as well as significantly more saltpeter deposits, and of course began to mine that and push this export out to the world. Looking at some of the saltpeter posters advertising this Chilean mineral, I realized what this person on the stamp is actually doing. Initially I thought they were a miner of some sort, like this could be a miner's helmet almost, but they must be a farmer with a sack of fertilizer that they're sprinkling over the soil. It's almost a direct match to this particular poster. Saltpeter has been celebrated more than once on Chilean stamps. Our 1930 stamp was part of a set celebrating saltpeter, primarily its use within agriculture, and there have been others as well. I must point out that throughout all of this history we're exploring Chilean philately, Chile went through some major political turmoil as well. They went through a revolution and a civil war and major economic downturns that were devastating. And while the saltpeter export contributed to their growth and their economy and giving the country some prosperity, some say Chile's win over the saltpeter resources was a bit of a curse, because the country became dependent on this mineral and as a result was susceptible to fluctuations in global events that changed the demand for saltpeter. So I find this stamp that we pulled from the box as an interesting turning point in the great Chilean saltpeter industry, because in the early 1900s, Chile was producing 2/3 of the world's fertilizer with its saltpeter. But by 1930, as it was entering the Great Depression, there was already a new method for making this white gold synthetically at an industrial level that was ultimately replacing the need for Chilean saltpeter. This new method was actually developed in 1909, still several years back, but was perfected, of course, with improvements in technology and, of course, motivation through 2 world wars to be able to make something synthetically instead of rely on Chilean exports. Basically, now there was no need for saltpeter. You could create the nitrogen through new methods and sources, disastrous for the saltpeter mines in the Atacama desert. They simply could not compete with the new methods. Most of the mines were eventually closed by the 1960s. They became ghost towns, places that you can visit today and walk through abandoned homes, schools, hospitals, and mines. But they are deteriorating quickly due to the harsh Atacama desert conditions. I have a cover from one of these places, the mining town of Pedro de Valdivia. Not the city of Valdivia, but the town of Pedro de Valdivia. Remember the guy that we saw earlier on in this episode? The conquistador, the first face to appear after Columbus, and the first stamp to be printed in Chile. Anyway, this town, Pedro de Valdivia, was actually established in 1931, the year after our stamp from the box was issued. But the mine eventually closed and the town was abandoned in 1996. So it is a ghost town today. It is somewhat surprising that this town made it into the 1990s, and here's a cover from that very ghost town sent in July in 1963, using beautiful 1-cent Chilean stamps on their way to the capital city, Santiago. I've met philatelists and postal historians that enjoy collecting items from places that don't exist anymore, whether it's post offices or complete towns, such as this one. This is, of course, a letter from a post office that doesn't exist. The town doesn't exist. It is a relic from an important part of Chile's history. And in this video description, I'll link to images and other videos that show people visiting this particular ghost town. I just find things like this really, really interesting. Again, I am mind blown by what I've learned from pulling a stamp from the box. Let me know in the comments if you collect stamps from Chile, the Columbus heads, postmarks from ghost towns, or anything that was covered or not covered in this episode about Chile and its saltpeter industry. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. As always, thank you for watching and happy exploring.